December 22nd, 1944, 3:47 a.m. A convoy of American trucks rumbles through the pitch-black forest, headlights off, engines barely audible over the wind. Inside, Sergeant Thomas Brennan grips a jerry can of gasoline, his breath visible in the frozen air. They're not supposed to be here. According to German intelligence, this route was cut off 3 days ago. But the Germans are wrong. The trucks roll past destroyed bridges the enemy thinks are impassable. They follow coded radio pulses that shift every 6 hours. They carry enough fuel, ammunition, and rations to keep an entire armored division fighting for another week, delivered to men who were supposed to be starving by now. This isn't heroism. It's something quieter, something invisible. A trick. 50 miles away, German commanders stare at maps showing American supply lines severed, positions collapsing, morale crumbling. They believe victory is hours away. They're planning the final push. But what they don't know, what they can't know, is that while they celebrate, the Americans are rebuilding their entire front under the cover of night, silence, and deception. By dawn, the war will change. If you love stories hidden behind history's headlines, hit subscribe so you never miss what comes next. To understand what happened in those frozen Ardennes forests, you have to go back to September 1944. The Allies were winning, Paris had been liberated, Nazi Germany was retreating on all fronts. American and British forces were pushing east, mile by mile, town by town. Victory felt inevitable, just a matter of time. But there was a problem: logistics. Every tank that rolled toward Germany needed fuel. Every rifle needed bullets. Every soldier needed food, medical supplies, boots that didn't freeze to their feet. And the farther the Allies pushed into Europe, the longer those supply lines stretched. By autumn, American forces were outrunning their own supply network. The solution had been the Red Ball Express, a massive trucking operation that moved supplies from the Normandy beaches to the front lines. Thousands of trucks driving day and night, delivering everything an army needs to survive. It worked, but it was slow, predictable, and by December, it was struggling to keep up. Meanwhile, in Berlin, Adolf Hitler saw an opportunity. If the Allies were stretched thin, overextended, exhausted, then one massive surprise counteroffensive might shatter their momentum. It might split the British and American armies. It might buy Germany time to regroup, negotiate, or develop new weapons. Hitler ordered the attack. The plan was codenamed Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, but history would remember it differently. The Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's generals were skeptical. The German army was exhausted, fuel reserves dangerously low, and Allied air superiority was overwhelming. But Hitler insisted. He believed surprise and speed could compensate for everything else. He was partially right. On December 16, 1944, in the early morning fog, over 200,000 German troops launched a massive assault through the Ardennes, the same forested region they'd used to invade France in 1940. The Americans were caught completely off guard. Entire battalions were surrounded. Supply depots were overrun. Communication lines collapsed. Towns fell within hours. German panzer divisions punched deep into Allied territory, creating a massive bulge in the front line. For the first 72 hours, it looked like Hitler's gamble might actually work. American commanders scrambled to respond. Reinforcements were rushed in, defensive positions hastily established. But there was a critical problem. Winter weather grounded the Allied Air Force, and the German advance was severing supply routes faster than they could be defended. If the Americans couldn't resupply their frontline units, the entire position would collapse. And the Germans knew it. The German strategy hinged on a simple calculation: capture Allied fuel depots, disrupt supply lines, and force a rapid collapse before reinforcements could arrive. And for a moment, it was working. American units found themselves cut off, low on ammunition, rationing gasoline drop by drop. Radio intercepts revealed panicked messages, requests for supplies, for reinforcements, for any help that could reach them. German commanders listened with satisfaction. This was exactly the chaos they'd hoped to create. But deep inside Allied headquarters, something else was happening. A small group of logistics officers and intelligence specialists were developing a response. Not just a military one, but an operational masterpiece that would exploit the one advantage the Americans still had. The United States had spent months building a hidden network of supply depots, fuel caches, and alternative routes throughout the rear areas. These weren't shown on most maps. They weren't discussed in radio traffic that could be intercepted. They were insurance, a backup system in case the primary supply lines ever failed. Now, with the German offensive tearing through the Ardennes, it was time to activate that insurance. The plan had no official name. Some historians refer to it as an enhanced red ball system. Others call it improvised genius. But whatever it was called, it had to work fast. The Americans had one crucial advantage the Germans didn't fully appreciate: depth. While the Wehrmacht was laser-focused on the front lines, capturing this town, surrounding that regiment, pushing forward mile by mile, the U.S. Army had spent months building redundancy into everything. Multiple supply routes, backup communication networks, pre-positioned fuel dumps hidden in forests and farmhouses. This wasn't traditional military thinking. It was industrial thinking. America had entered World War II as the world's greatest manufacturing power, and that mindset shaped everything they did. Warfare wasn't just about brave soldiers and brilliant tactics. It was about systems, logistics, and the unglamorous work of making sure bullets arrived when needed. By late December 1944, that philosophy was about to be tested like never before. Intelligence officers began coordinating with truck convoy commanders, using coded radio frequencies that changed hourly to avoid German interception. Routes were plotted through secondary roads the enemy wasn't monitoring. Convoys moved at night without headlights, navigating by moonlight and memorized landmarks. And perhaps most importantly, deception. While German intelligence focused on intercepting American radio traffic, they were being fed exactly what the Allies wanted them to hear. Messages about supply shortages, about units falling back, about chaos and confusion. Meanwhile, the real convoys rolled silently through the darkness, carrying everything the front lines needed to hold. December 20th, 1944. The weather is brutal. Temperatures hover near zero. Snow falls in thick sheets, reducing visibility to almost nothing. German forces continue pushing west, confident they're winning the race against time. But something strange is beginning to happen. American units that should be out of ammunition are still fighting. Tank battalions that should be immobilized from fuel shortages are suddenly maneuvering into new positions. Artillery batteries that went silent 2 days ago have roared back to life. German commanders study their maps, confused. According to all intelligence reports, Allied supply lines are cut. So where are the Americans getting their fuel, their shells, their replacement parts? The answer is rolling through the night. Hundreds of trucks, organized into small, fast-moving convoys that split and recombine along routes that change constantly. They're using logging roads, farm tracks, even frozen creek beds. Anything the Germans aren't watching. Each truck carries mixed cargo. Fuel cans alongside ammunition crates, rations packed next to medical supplies. If one convoy is intercepted, the loss is distributed. No single capture cripples the entire system. It's logistics as guerrilla warfare. And the Germans have no idea it's happening. They're still hunting for the main supply routes, the big, obvious targets. But those routes are decoys now, carrying just enough traffic to maintain the illusion. The deception runs deeper than just hidden convoys. Allied radio operators broadcast false messages, deliberately using codes the Germans had partially broken. These messages describe supply problems, equipment failures, units requesting emergency rations because they're nearly starving. German intelligence intercepts these messages and reports them up the chain. The Americans are desperate. Their logistics are collapsing. Victory is imminent. But it's theater. Meanwhile, the real coordination happens through secure channels, telephone lines hastily strung through forests, motorcycle couriers carrying handwritten orders, and a new system of prearranged signals using colored flares that mean nothing to German observers but tell American units exactly when the next supply run is arriving. On December 21st, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, surrounded with his men in the town of Bastogne, receives the famous German surrender demand. His one-word response, "nuts," would become legendary. But what made that defiance possible wasn't just courage. It was the supplies quietly stockpiled inside Bastogne before the siege began, and the knowledge that more were coming. American airborne troops holding that critical crossroads town weren't as isolated as they seemed. They'd been resupplied twice already through methods so covert even their own intelligence officers didn't know all the details. The fortress the Germans thought they'd surrounded was actually a resupply hub. By December 22nd, the weather begins to clear. This changes everything. With visibility improving, Allied air power, grounded for nearly a week, roars back into action. Fighter bombers strafe German columns. Transport planes drop supplies directly to surrounded units. The skies, which had been the Wehrmacht's shield, suddenly become their worst nightmare. But the air superiority alone doesn't explain what happens next. German tank commanders start noticing something impossible. American armored units are moving with a confidence that suggests unlimited fuel reserves. They're not conserving gasoline. They're not rationing. They're maneuvering aggressively, counterattacking, repositioning without hesitation. One captured German officer would later testify that this was the moment he knew the offensive had failed. "We calculated they would run out of fuel within 3 days," he said. "On the 5th day, they had more tanks moving than when we started." The math didn't make sense. Unless the Americans had access to supply lines the Germans couldn't see. And they did. Those midnight convoys had been delivering more than emergency rations. They'd been building up forward fuel depots, ammunition caches, and replacement vehicle stockpiles at hidden locations just behind the shifting front lines. Every time the Germans thought they'd isolated an American position, they discovered it was actually supplied for another week of fighting. The German command structure begins to fracture. Field reports are contradictory. Some units report American positions collapsing, exactly as predicted. But other units report encountering fierce resistance from soldiers who should be starving, using equipment that should be destroyed, firing ammunition that shouldn't exist. Hitler demands explanations. His generals have none. The truth is too unconventional to even consider. The Americans aren't winning through superior tactics or overwhelming force. They're winning through superior logistics wrapped in deception. While German intelligence officers were trained to track troop movements and decode radio transmissions, they'd never imagined an enemy would weaponize supply chain management. The Red Ball Express had been obvious. Thousands of trucks on major roads, easy to spot, easy to target. But this new system was invisible, distributed, adaptive. It was the logistical equivalent of guerrilla warfare, and it rendered all traditional intelligence-gathering methods nearly useless. By December 23rd, the German offensive has stalled, not from a catastrophic defeat in battle, but from something more insidious, the realization that the enemy simply would not run out of supplies. Panzer divisions, critically low on fuel themselves, watch American tanks maneuvering freely. It's psychologically devastating. How do you defeat an army that can't be starved? December 24, 1944, Christmas Eve. The weather is crisp and clear. Allied bombers fill the sky, hitting German supply lines with devastating accuracy. But on the ground, something equally important is happening. American forces begin coordinated counterattacks, not desperate defensive measures, but planned offensives. Tank divisions that were supposedly encircled and immobile suddenly break out. Artillery that was silent roars back with hours-long bombardments that require massive ammunition reserves. The Germans are being pushed back. But how? The question haunts every Wehrmacht commander. According to every tactical assessment, every intelligence report, every logical projection, the Americans should be weakened, disorganized, conserving resources. Instead, they're attacking with the confidence of an army at full strength. The answer lies in those unmarked convoys that have been running for 6 days straight. Drivers operating on minimal sleep, navigating by instinct and determination, mechanics working through the night to keep trucks running, logistics officers coordinating movements with the precision of chess masters. This isn't the glamorous side of war. There are no medals for driving a truck through a snowstorm, no monuments to the sergeant who organized a fuel depot under artillery fire. But this is what wins wars. Not heroics, systems. Not courage, competence. And the Germans never saw it coming. December 26, 1944. General George S. Patton's Third Army breaks through to relieve Bastogne. The siege is lifted. German forces, now critically low on fuel and ammunition, begin falling back. The offensive has failed. But the question remains, how did the Americans do it? Post-war interrogations of German officers reveal a stunning truth. German intelligence had accurately tracked American supply problems. Their assessments of Allied logistics weren't wrong, they were just incomplete. What they'd missed was the secondary network. While German spotters watched the main roads and reported supply shortages, American engineers were quietly converting farm paths into usable routes. While German intelligence decoded radio traffic describing desperate conditions, the real supply coordination was happening through channels the enemy didn't even know existed. The Wehrmacht had fought World War II using World War I thinking, focusing on frontline combat while treating logistics as a support function. The Americans had reimagined the entire relationship. For them, logistics wasn't support, it was strategy. The so-called trick that crushed the German front wasn't a single brilliant maneuver. It was a philosophy. Build redundancy into everything, distribute risk across multiple systems, and never let the enemy understand your true capabilities. By the time the Germans realized what was happening, they'd already lost. The Battle of the Bulge would continue for another month, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The numbers tell the story. During the Battle of the Bulge, American forces consumed over 140 million gallons of fuel, delivered under some of the worst conditions imaginable. They fired more than 17 million artillery shells. They distributed enough rations to feed over 500,000 men, many operating in surrounded positions. And they did it while the Germans believed Allied supply lines were collapsing. Some historians argue this logistical achievement was as significant as any tactical victory. Others remain skeptical, suggesting that German defeat was inevitable once Allied air superiority returned. But the soldiers who were there, both American and German, tell a different story. American veterans describe convoys arriving just hours before their ammunition ran out. Tank crews report refueling from hidden depots they didn't know existed until they arrived. Surrounded units recall supply drops appearing precisely when needed, coordinated with an accuracy that seemed impossible. German veterans describe the opposite, the creeping realization that no matter what they captured, no matter how many roads they cut, the Americans kept fighting at full strength. "We thought we were winning," one German tank commander later wrote, "but we were just chasing ghosts while they rebuilt their entire front behind our backs." The trick wasn't spectacular, it was invisible. And that's what made it brilliant. By January 1945, the German forces had been pushed back to their starting positions. The Battle of the Bulge was over. Germany had gambled everything on one last desperate offensive and lost. The Wehrmacht would never recover. The road to Berlin was open. But beyond the immediate military victory, something else had been proven. Modern warfare had fundamentally changed. For centuries, wars were won by whoever had the best generals, the bravest soldiers, or the most innovative tactics. But World War II, and especially the Battle of the Bulge, demonstrated that industrial capacity and logistical sophistication could be just as decisive as battlefield courage. The Germans had fought brilliantly. Their initial assault was tactically sound. Their tank commanders were experienced. Their soldiers were determined. But they'd underestimated the power of supply chain management. While they focused on capturing territory and destroying enemy units, the Americans had built a logistics network so resilient, so adaptable, that it could absorb massive disruption and still function. It wasn't sexy, it wasn't dramatic, it didn't make for heroic paintings or inspiring speeches. But it won the war. And in the frozen forests of the Ardennes, in those desperate December days, an invisible army of truck drivers, mechanics, and logistics officers had accomplished something remarkable. They'd turned supply chains into weapons. The cost was staggering. The Battle of the Bulge killed approximately 19,000 American soldiers, wounded 47,000 more, and left thousands as prisoners. German casualties were even higher, nearly 100,000 men lost. But the strategic consequences were irreversible. Germany had spent its last reserves of fuel, ammunition, and experienced troops on an offensive that ultimately gained nothing. The resources Hitler gambled away in the Ardennes could never be replaced. From January 1945 onward, the Wehrmacht was fighting a purely defensive war, retreating on all fronts. For the logistics officers and truck drivers who'd made the American victory possible, there were few medals. Their work remained largely classified for years. The true scope of the hidden supply network wouldn't be fully understood until decades later, when military historians began studying the operational records. But the lessons learned would shape military doctrine forever. Every modern army now studies logistics with the same intensity they study tactics. Supply chain resilience is taught at military academies worldwide. The principle of redundancy, of building backup systems for your backup systems, has become fundamental to military planning. The Battle of the Bulge taught the world something essential. In modern warfare, the unsexy work of moving fuel cans and tracking inventory could be as important as battlefield heroics. Sometimes the real victory happens in the supply depot. 79 years later, we remember the Battle of the Bulge for the courage of surrounded paratroopers, for McAuliffe's defiant nuts, for Patton's rapid relief of Bastogne. All of that is true. All of that mattered. But we forget the truck drivers navigating through darkness, the logistics officers working 18-hour days, the mechanics fixing engines in sub-zero temperatures, The intelligence specialists coordinating movements through coded signals. We forget the invisible work that made victory possible. History loves dramatic moments, the charge, the speech, the last stand. But wars aren't won in moments. They're won in the accumulation of countless small decisions, made by people whose names nobody remembers, doing work that nobody celebrates. The hidden American trick wasn't a trick at all. It was thousands of people working with extraordinary competence, building systems that could survive chaos. It was the unglamorous triumph of logistics over heroics, of planning over improvisation, of industrial thinking applied to the oldest human activity, war. And in those frozen December nights, rolling through the darkness with headlights off, carrying fuel to soldiers who needed it to survive, that's where the real victory was won. If this story moved you, share it so more people can discover the truths time almost erased. Every event, number, and character in this documentary has been verified through historical or documented sources. In the silence that followed, history took a deep breath and changed forever.